There are children who never learned how to scream, even when life was loud. Children who swallowed their truth because silence felt safer than being misunderstood. This is the story of the quiet ones. What they lived, what they felt, and what they never said out loud. There is a kind of childhood that doesn't appear in family photo albums. It's not loud, it's not chaotic, it's not full of stories told around dinner tables. It's the kind of childhood lived behind quiet eyes and soft footsteps. There is a kind of childhood that doesn't appear in family photo albums. It's not loud, it's not chaotic, it's not full of stories told around dinner tables. It's the kind of childhood lived behind quiet eyes and soft footsteps. A childhood where the loudest moments happen inside the mind, and the outside world is a distant echo. This is the childhood of an introvert. The child who never interrupted. The child who never demanded attention. The child who learned early that silence is both a shield and a prison. And even now, as an adult, some of the deepest wounds come not from what happened, but from what you could never bring yourself to say. When you were young, people mistook your silence for shyness, or weakness, or fear. But they never understood the truth. Silence was your language. It was how you protected yourself from the chaos outside. You didn't want to blend in. You simply wanted the world to stop feeling so loud. You listened more than you spoke, because listening felt safer. Listening meant control. Listening meant you didn't have to force yourself into spaces where you felt you didn't belong. But no one ever asked why you chose quietness. They assumed, without thinking, that being quiet meant nothing was happening inside you. They didn't know your mind was a universe. They didn't know you processed everything, magnified everything, felt everything 10 times deeper than they did. During childhood, the world felt like a room where everyone else walked freely, while you stood against the wall, observing. You weren't afraid of people. You were afraid of being misunderstood by them. Every time you tried to speak, your thoughts tangled. Words felt heavy, like stones you were forced to push uphill. So you swallowed them, again and again. You carried your voice like a fragile object you never dared to drop. You replayed conversations in your head long after they ended, analyzing every expression, every tone, wondering if you said too much or too little. And sometimes, you said nothing at all, because silence could not be misinterpreted. There were moments in school when teachers asked questions, and you knew the answer. Not just knew it, you knew it with confidence, with clarity. But raising your hand felt like stepping under a spotlight. Your heartbeat grew loud in your ears, and suddenly, the simple act of speaking felt like stripping your soul in front of strangers. So you let the loud kids answer. You let them take the praise, the attention, the validation. Not because you didn't want it, but because the cost of being seen was higher than the reward of being right. And so, slowly, people formed their conclusion. Quiet, reserved, not very confident. They never imagined the depth beneath the stillness. You learned early that people talked over you not out of cruelty, but because silence invites interruption. If you paused for more than a second, someone filled the space. If you hesitated, someone else took over the conversation. And after enough times of being overshadowed, your words became fossils buried, preserved, untouched. You grew into someone who avoided sharing anything too personal. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you didn't trust people to hold your truth gently. Your childhood had a different kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who never truly heard you. You sat in rooms filled with voices, but none of them matched yours. You watched friendships form around you, loud and confident and effortless, while you built quiet connections that felt more fragile than they should. You found comfort in books, in drawing, in wandering the world inside your head. The imaginary places you created felt more real than the world that expected you to talk more, or come out of your shell. You didn't want to come out. Your mind was your home. But even homes can feel like cages when the world tells you they're wrong. People said things like you're too sensitive, as if sensitivity was a flaw. They said, "Why are you so quiet?" As if quietness demanded explanation. They said, "Speak up, be confident, use your voice," but never considered that you already were. You were speaking in the only way you knew how. They didn't see the invisible storms you navigated. They didn't know how much courage it took to express even a fraction of what you felt. And so, you adapted. You grew into the habit of disappearing. Not physically emotively, You learned to minimize yourself, to shrink your presence so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You learned to smile instead of explain, nod instead of protest, hide instead of confront. You became the child who carried all their questions inside, wondering if something was wrong with them because they didn't crave noise or excitement or social validation. But nothing was wrong with you. The world simply refused to understand people who shine quietly. Sometimes, the darkness in your childhood came not from isolation but from the weight of watching everything too closely. You noticed things other kids didn't: the tension behind closed doors, the exhaustion in your mother's eyes, the quiet arguments whispered between adults who thought you weren't listening. You felt the anger that wasn't directed at you, the sadness that wasn't yours to carry, the disappointment that lingered in the air like dust. You absorbed all of it, like a sponge that never learned how to wring itself out, and no one knew. Because introverts feel deeply, but express quietly. Pain echoes louder when you hold it in. You were the kind of child who cried silently, not because you wanted to be strong, but because you knew crying loudly wouldn't change anything. You trained yourself to break inwardly, quietly, gently without disturbing anyone. Your heart learned how to ache behind closed doors. Your mind learned how to bury its wounds under a calm face. People looked at you and saw stillness. They never saw the battles you fought alone at night, in the corners of your room, in the small spaces where your tears dried before anyone noticed. School was not designed for you. Life wasn't either. But childhood made you believe something dangerous, that being quiet meant being lesser, that your softness made you weak, that your thoughts didn't matter unless spoken quickly, loudly, confidently. And that belief grew inside you like a shadow. It followed you into your teenage years, into adulthood, into relationships where you didn't know how to voice your needs. You felt guilty asking for space, even though you needed it to breathe. You felt guilty speaking your mind, even though silence was suffocating. You felt guilty being yourself, because the world rewarded the opposite of who you were. Your childhood shaped you in ways you still don't fully understand. You became hyper-aware of everything: tones, expressions, energy shifts, because silence made you a natural observer. You could predict conflict before anyone else sensed it. You could read sadness behind a smile. You could feel when someone's words didn't match their intentions. Your intuition sharpened like a blade. But this gift came with a cost. The heavier something felt, the quieter you became. You hid your distress so well that even the people closest to you rarely saw it. And here's the darkest truth you carried. Sometimes, you wished someone would notice your silence. Not to force you to speak. Not to interrogate you. Just to understand that silence was your way of saying, "I'm struggling." But introverts often suffer invisibly. You could be breaking, and people would still call you calm. You could be screaming internally, and they'd say, "You're so composed." You could be drowning, and they'd compliment how peaceful you look on the surface. There were memories you never shared. The times when you sat alone during lunch but pretended you preferred it that way. The times you rehearsed simple sentences in your head before saying them aloud. The times you walked into a room and felt every pair of eyes like a weight on your chest. The times you wanted to join a conversation but couldn't find an opening. The times you held your breath when someone asked for your opinion because the pressure to speak made your stomach feel tight. These moments shaped you not with noise, but with quiet scars. And yet, despite all the darkness, there was something beautiful in your silence. Your mind became a sanctuary. Your imagination became a refuge. You learned to listen, to empathize, to understand the world in ways loud people never have to. Your quietness gave you depth. Your sensitivity gave you insight. Your solitude gave you strength. Not the loud kind of strength, the whispered kind. The kind people underestimate until they need someone who doesn't crumble under silence. But the world rarely celebrates the quiet child. They celebrate the charismatic ones, the bold ones, the outspoken ones. And so you grew up feeling unseen, unheard, uninterpreted. You became fluent in hiding your discomfort, masking your overwhelm, pretending your silence was intentional even when it wasn't. You learned to survive without being understood. And eventually, you learned the skill every introvert masters too early: disappearing gracefully. You built your life around avoiding judgment, avoiding confrontation, avoiding moments where your voice could crack or fail. You apologized too often. You overthought every decision. You held back even when you wanted to reach out. Your childhood taught you how to be small and adulthood kept rewarding you for it. People called you easygoing, low maintenance, calm, not realizing that these traits often come from a lifetime of suppressing your own needs. Some nights, you lay awake wondering who you might have become if the world had nurtured your quietness instead of misinterpreting it. If someone had told you, as a child, that silence is not emptiness, that introversion is not a flaw, that your inner world is not less real than the outer one, that your voice matters if it is soft, that you don't need to speak the loudest to be heard, that deep thinkers often speak later, not because they're slow, but because they're careful. Your childhood silence didn't ruin you, but it left marks. You became the adult who hesitates before expressing their feelings, the adult who second-guesses their own needs, the adult who avoids asking for help because vulnerability feels dangerous, the adult who hides behind phrases like "I'm fine" or "it's nothing" when it is absolutely something. You became the adult who struggles to believe their feelings are valid, the adult who feels guilty for needing rest, or space, or solitude. But none of these things are weaknesses. They are the natural consequences of being a deeply inward, deeply sensitive, deeply observant soul in a world that praises the opposite. And yet here you are, growing, healing, understanding, learning, slowly, painfully, compassionately, that your childhood silence did not make you broken. It made you intricate. It made you perceptive. It made you resilient in ways no one else will ever fully see. You survived the loneliness of being misunderstood by everyone, while understanding everyone far too well. You survived the pressure to fit into a world that never matched your wavelength. You survived the exhaustion of pretending to be louder, more social, more confident than you felt. And that survival, not the noise, not the adaptations, your true strength. This story is not about a child who needed fixing. It's about a child who needed understanding. A child who needed space to bloom at their own pace. A child who needed reassurance that quiet people are not empty. They're just full in a different way. A child who needed someone to recognize that the loudest thing about them wasn't their silence, but the depth it protected. You are still that child, in some ways. Still healing from the memories of being overlooked, questioned, pressured, misunderstood. Still learning how to reclaim your voice without betraying your nature. Still learning how to exist without apology, and that's okay. Growth does not require volume. Strength does not require noise. Your softness is not a weakness. Your quietness is not a flaw. Your introversion is not a cage, it is your design. The silent childhood of an introvert is a story written in invisible ink. The world rarely sees it, but it shapes everything. It teaches you how to hear the things no one says. It teaches you how to read between the lines. It teaches you how to feel deeply without demanding attention. It teaches you how to be comfortable in solitude, how to build worlds inside yourself, how to stay grounded when everything else shifts. It teaches you that silence is not the absence of sound, is the presence of meaning. And maybe, just maybe, it teaches you something even more powerful. That the quiet child you once were is still guiding you, still protecting you, still whispering the truth you never said out loud. That your silence was never empty. It was survival. It was strength. It was you.